Forget frequently asked questions.
Common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
go above and beyond.
They become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast
with Richard Jacobs.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius Podcast. I have Kevin Davis. He's a podcaster himself. He has Our Ketogenic Life podcast. So I wanted to talk to him and learn more about ketogenic lifestyle and what he does. So, Kevin, thanks for coming.
Hey, Richard, I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about your background. How did you first learn about the ketogenic lifestyle, and how long have you been working on it or adhering to that diet?
Well, it's an interesting story. I'm a physician assistant. I've been in practice for since 1994. So we were trained in the model of eating low fat, trying to watch our calories, eating quite often. And about 6 years ago, my wife she was having some inflammatory problems with joints, and went to see somebody. We sent her to a rheumatologist, and they said nothing was wrong with her, but she didn't feel well. So she started actually researching, how to control inflammation. And she come across something called a ketogenic diet. And, my wife being the better half of myself is, she said, well, this seems like it may work. And of course, when I first started looking at that, I'm thinking, no, that goes against everything I was trained against. So actually, I kind of set out to kind of prove her wrong, to say that, this isn't the right thing to do. But the thing about it is the more that I researched it, the more it made sense. If you look at it from a scientific standpoint, as far as how foods interact in your body, because that's not something we're taught a lot in school. So after researching for 2 or 3 months, we started doing it together. And we've been doing that for almost 5 years, and we've been doing it ever since.
What did you notice when you did it, in the first few weeks? And then what have you noticed longer term?
Well, that was the thing is, a lot of times we go to a ketogenic type lifestyle and we look at the short-term results. And obviously the first couple of months, we lost weight. I personally lost 25 pounds. And after adhering to, pretty much a strict ketogenic diet for a couple of months. And my wife, she noticed that her inflammation, things like joint pains and headaches and those type of symptoms that you see with a lot of inflammation, both of those, all those kind of symptoms actually decreased where, she could function at a higher level. So doing the ketogenic diet, a lot of times people, right, even to this day, will come to me knowing that are wanting to have a weight loss. That's usually a primary concern. But over the last 5 years, because I continue to study this is not something I just looked at for 3 or 4 months and did it and then not looked back. I've studied more on this probably than I have a lot of things in my career. And the more research that I do to as far as chronic diseases, and when I say chronic diseases, I want to say things like heart disease, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, even things like developing diabetes, the long-term medical problems that we have, almost across the board, the ketogenic diet helps. So now, again, most people come to me for weight loss, and I think that's great. But I'm looking at the underlying things that are going in their body, the metabolic problems. So, I see that if they're having symptoms of some kind of long-term disease like joint pains, especially if they have a family history of something, if they're on medication, signs of insulin resistance or diabetes. I know that by putting them on a ketogenic diet, I'm going to help reverse some of these things that are going on. And ultimately, that's my goal, is to increase not only their health span, but also our health span. To me, it's not a aim just to live longer. Everybody wants to live longer, but, God's going to call us home when he calls us home. But our goal and the thing that keeps us going and keeps us progressing towards better health is we want to live a lifespan or a life that includes health. So, we want to be 75, 80, 90, whatever it may be. and live healthy up until that time, be able to do the things that we want to do. And it all starts right now. Well, the things that we do now are going to determine the kind of health we have later on. So I've had people just last week, again, I always tell everybody this. I'm not giving anybody medical advice, by the way. All right. This is something you need to talk to your provider. I forgot to say that at the beginning, but I see this stuff every day. I see last week, there was a lady who came to me 3 months ago with diabetes, and her A1C, which is an average of your blood sugar over 3 months, was really high. Her average probably was like, 300 plus, which is pretty high if your listeners know diabetes of anything.
You mean the blood sugar was 300 plus on average?
Yes.
Holy cow.
So, and that's like an A1C of like 12 or 13. I can't remember exactly what her number was. And she was here in my clinic a couple of weeks ago, and with the diet and one medication, her A1C came down to like 5.8. And anything less than 5.6 is normal. So it's just amazing the things that you can control with your diet as far as your health is concerned. I think a lot of people don't realize how powerful it is, the decisions they make every day on what they eat and what they don't eat, and how it can control and affect their bodies, how they feel every day, how they sleep. And it's just, if I could just get that message across to people that it's not a lost cause. It's not something that, you're diagnosed with diabetes and, you got a death sentence, or you've got this problem. You have control over some of these things. And the sooner that you start, the better off you're going to be.
What are some of the difficult cases? When people try to do the ketogenic diet, are there some that just don't get, and I'm not just talking about weight loss, but does everyone get results? What kind of people seem to have problems with it? And if so, what are their problems? Like, what are the, I hate to ask you that. Normally I just want to ask about the mainstream, but I've asked a lot of people that. So I want to ask about the outliers you've seen and what your thoughts are on why they're outliers.
Probably, this is no offense. If my wife was sitting here, she would agree with me that females are a little bit more difficult. And I think it has to do with hormones. So let me back up a little bit. Men across the board, if they would do this, it's pretty much age independent. They do really well. Females who are in their, say 45 or less, they're not perimenal or postmenopausal. They're having their regular cycles. They do really well. The subset that really has a little bit more difficulty, and I have to kind of do a little bit more individualized coaching, is the perimenopausal, meaning people like ladies that are in roughly age 50 and postmenopausal. And a lot of that has to do because of the hormones. The ketogenic diet, which I don't know how much you know about the ketogenic diet, but
I've been on it. A few years ago, I went on it because I had thyroid cancer, and I wanted to make sure that I did everything I could to slow its progression and be healthy. And I did end up losing about 40 pounds over, 6-7 months. And
that's awesome.
I had a lot of different experiences with it.
So the hormones, let me finish that about the peri and postmenopausal. A lot of it has to do with hormones as far as the way that they eat and doing a cycle as far as the ketogenic. There's some more carb up days is what we call them during those times. And we try to do those certain days of the month so that the hormones can reset and stabilize. Because if you have female listeners here and they're, going through menopause or they're after menopause, they know certain times of the month they feel better and sometimes they don't. And a lot of that is just, it's not mental, it's a physical symptoms that has to do with their hormones. So what we try to do is pair their diet up with their hormones and try to optimize their treatment. Because with the ketogenic diet, if you go back to trying to lose weight, the hormones are what is affected. It's not about calories in, calories out. It's about what you eat and how it affects your hormone. And one of the main hormones that it affects is your insulin. And your insulin, we call that your fat storage hormone. And the reason that we do a ketogenic diet is if you think about insulin as a fat storage hormone, if you eat carbs and sugar, it's going to raise your insulin level. And when you raise your insulin level, you have fat storage. If you feed your body fat, it doesn't raise your insulin level, and you don't have that fat storage process going on because you start changing from being a sugar burner to a fat burner. And that's what we call one of our memberships is a Fat Burners Academy. So when you're talking about weight loss, it has to do with your hormones. And we can't I always use insulin because I think that's one of the main drivers, but there's other hormones involved as well. There's hormones like cortisol. There's your male and female hormones. There's your thyroid hormone. There's a hormone called Ghrelin, which is your hunger hormone. You got a hormone coming from your fat cells called leptin, and that's your satiety hormone. So when you affect one hormone, there's a cascading effect affecting these other hormones. So that's why I think it's a little bit more difficult with perimenopause and postmenopausal women, is because you're trying to get that delicate balance between all these hormones, because all these hormones, any hormone I just mentioned, neither one of these are good or bad. But what we have to strive for is a balance. And it's amazing what you can do with your diet. And we do a lot of fasting protocols. What you can do with your hormones just by changing your diet, when you eat and how much you eat.
For women, have you been able to figure out how they should eat, like ketogenic eating for women during different times of their cycle? Mm-hmm. Have you looked into that, and have you figured out any knowledge there?
Yes. There's not a one size fit all. It's more of a ongoing process to try to figure out each and every body. But there is a certain time of the month, like the first couple of months, you can do more fasting. You can do more lower carb. The second part of their month, then, and we're talking about like 14 days after they've had their start of their period, you need to do more carb up days and less fasting.
What does that mean, carb updates?
Like on a ketogenic diet, we recommend around 20 carbs per day. 5, maybe 10 or less % of your total calories come from carbs. So on those days that we say carb up, then we're eating things like a sweet potato or something like that. Some good carbs. We're not out eating cookies and candies and things like that. But we'll go up to 100 carbs on somebody. And that helps reset their hormones. So that, the thing that I try to do all the time with anybody that I work with, and we call our site is called Our Ketogenic Life, because we want a lifestyle that people can do this for years to come. If we need to do carb up days to help people get to the results that they want and continue to progress towards better health, then that's where we work with them at. I have some people who I say eat 20 carbs and they just eat 20 carbs. They don't stray from it. But a lot of people, it's hard sometimes. And if you're talking about hormones, which you're talking about a woman's physiology, then it's not just about willpower. You have to address those issues so that someone can continue doing this kind of lifestyle, because what we talked about earlier, the long-term benefits of doing a ketogenic lifestyle, the more research that's being done, and I read this on a regular basis, it's just amazing long-term how the benefits that you can get from it. So if we can get somebody started on the ketogenic diet, get results, and teach them how to continue doing the ketogenic diet so it can fit their lifestyle, then, everybody's a winner.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Long term, what do things seem to settle in for your listeners? For the people that go on this program and they just get used to it, that's how they eat, and they're totally fine, or do they still experience like problems occasionally? Like what happens long term?
Well, I don't know. I always use this as an example of, and everybody probably knows somebody who smoked and they've quit 10 years, but they still crave a cigarette every now and then. And again, that has to do with some serotonin and dopamine in your brain. You start thinking about it, it gets released. So an example from our life personally, when someone goes from a standard American diet to a ketogenic diet, a lot of times there's some cravings that people have. And probably for the first year, my wife and I, we created things and kept them in our freezers called fat bombs. And if you don't know what a fat bomb is, you can look online and just type in fat bomb. But it's pretty much something just made of fat. And it has like some sugar substitutes and some dark chocolate or something like that. And for the first year, I would at nighttime feel like I wanted to eat something. And we would have those in our freezer because you have to keep them in your freezer or they'll melt. And I'd have 1 or 2 every night. That was 5 years ago. After about a year, and I didn't realize this, I didn't plan it, but after a year or so, we got to the point where I can't remember the last time we made one because it becomes just like any kind of other lifestyle. It gets ingrained. This is who I am.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
This is what I do. And I'm not the old person that I used to be. So if people can be helped, especially in a community setting, if they're surrounding themselves with people who are like-minded, and they do this for 6 to 8 months, I find that they can continue doing it. If they try to do it just short term and just kind of like jump into it without, having some kind of support system, it's a little bit harder. You can do it, but it's a little bit harder to do it that way. But most people who will work with us, especially in our, that we've had in our clinic that have done it, they are continuing to do it to this day.
Yeah, I noticed when I first started, I would be like ravenous, and I could eat crazy amounts of stuff and still be hungry like 20 minutes later. And then that calmed down, but it took probably like a month or so.
If you feed yourself, and it goes back to your hormones, if you're eating enough fat, and I don't know exactly what you were eating, but if you're eating enough fat, it actually suppresses ghrelin, which is your hunger hormone, and you're not as hungry. And I was
having a lot of protein. I mean, I was having fat, but I was also having like probably more protein than I should have. But I remember one night I had like 6 scrambled eggs, like tomato soup, plain tomato soup, and like bacon, and I don't know whatever it was. And I like 20 minutes later, I was hungry again. I was like, man, what's it going to take? One thing I thought about, people are encouraged to have a lot more fat and proteins and, very little sugar and things like that on the ketogenic diet and carbs. But how do people like unintentionally sabotage themselves? Like, you could easily, I think, fool yourself if you're having a lot of fat, but you also have some sugar with it. Could that have a negative effect?
Oh,
or
definitely.
Yes, you're having a lot of fat, but even a little amount of sugar, could that turn the fat to fat instead of, making it be stored instead of being used for energy?
Well, you eat because your body needs energy. And the easiest way, and the way your body's been trained probably since, everybody was little, is to burn sugar as energy. And when you are burning sugar as energy, it goes back to your insulin level. And when you take in some food and you have some sugar in it, then your body is going to use that for energy. If you also eat fat with that, then your body's going to, you have to think about like 300 years ago. We didn't have grocery stores and restaurants in every corner. Sometimes people would, have a feast and then they may go 2 or 3 days without eating. And that's the way God made our body, is to be able to survive. The problem that we have is when you eat sugar and you eat fat together, that's a deadly combination, because your body uses that sugar for energy that you need right then. And it's going to say, hey, we need to store this fat in our liver as fat just in case we need it. Now, if we lived 300 years ago, that was great, because you may go a couple of days without eating. You break down that fat that's in your liver for energy, which we call ketones, and then you're able to continue to live. The problem that we have now is we eat sugar, we eat fat, and we don't miss the next day's meal. We do the same thing, and it keeps adding to your fat content in your body, either in your fat cells or your liver, your muscles, or somewhere through, wherever it needs to go. So actually doing both of those, eating sugar and fat, and if you look at the combination of food that we have in America, most of those will have both of those in there. And that's actually probably the worst thing you could do. You mentioned eating a lot of protein. Eating protein is important as you grow older, because you need to keep your muscle mass. But when you're eating a lot of protein, that's more like an Atkins diet that was, several years ago. And the thing with Atkins diet, and why I like the ketogenic diet better, is because when you're doing an Atkins diet, if you're eating excess protein, your body doesn't need it for energy, and it'll store it, because everything gets broken down to sugar in your body. It'll store that excess sugar as fat.
Let's say I'm on a ketogenic plan and I choose like 30 carbs a day. When should I have those carbs? Should I have them before meals, after meals, with the meals? When do you guess that they would be the least impactful? I've got to have some. I don't have iron will. So when should I have them? Day or night? Again, before or after, during meals? When will they be least impactful to me?
I think eating them in the evening time is the best time. And there's a couple different reasons for that. Most of the time during the daytime, if you could just eat like the protein and the fat and then the carbs, if you're eating those at nighttime, it'll help with your sleep cycle. Now, I have some people, and I've done it myself, to where I've actually progressed to a carnivore diet for a short amount of time, and I'm able to function as well. But if you're going to pick a time, I think the best time to eat those carbs is in your evening meal, like at dinner time. And ideally, we always try to get people to stop eating by 8 o'clock. The earlier that you stop eating, the better. But again, let's go back to your lifestyle. If I tell you to quit eating at 4 o'clock and then you're supposed to go out with your friends or your family or, have a family function dinner or, at night at 6 or 7 o'clock, it just doesn't work. At least try to do the carbs before 8 o'clock, at least 3 hours before you go to bed. And the earlier that you do them in the evening time, the better.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. I've had meals where, there was a lot of fat in it and I was just satisfied for, 5-6 hours. And then sometimes, it's kind of a fine line. I'd have some with a lot of fat and I'm like, oh God, I'm so full. And then, but you still get hungry pretty quickly, it's weird.
Yeah.
Any other refinements that you found that make it a lot more effective?
I think that the thing that we try to do is get people to get started on the right kinds of foods. So you have to get the right kinds of foods. You have to kind of go through with that draw, go through the keto flu, learn how to treat that with fluids and, with electrolytes and things like that. And then within a couple of weeks, most people that we kind of coach through this are doing really well, and they're able to start adding fasting to it. And really, when you start adding fasting and you've got your hormones controlled to where you can go and not eat, for an extended amount of time, and, you don't have to do like what I do. I do like a couple 24-hour fasts every week, but I've been doing it for 5 years. I don't start people on that. We start with we call it 12-12 or 16-8 fast, where they're fasting for 12 or 16 hours and eating for 12 or 8 hours, depending on how they're doing. And you just start learning to listen to your body. The thing that we tell everybody on our plan is if you are hungry, you are doing this wrong. This is something you should not be hungry on. This is something that you should be able to function on a regular basis and not feel hungry or deprived. And a lot of times what happens is after a couple, 2 or 3 weeks, people start missing meals because they're just not hungry. They're listening to their body. They're used to eating, say at 11 or 12 o'clock, and they are not hungry, and they'll go to 3 o'clock. And then a couple weeks later, they'll go a couple of days a week going to 6 o'clock. And then all of a sudden, they're fasting, not having any problems. I'm very active. I fast, like I said, for 24 hours, a couple of days a week, and I function normal, and I work out every day, and I'm still able to do more now than I did 10 years ago.
And you're 146, right?
Yeah.
So if someone's going to fast, even for 12 hours, what should be the last thing they eat that will help the fast? Or if they're going to do 24 or longer, what's the right way to go into a fast versus not? What's the right way to come out versus not?
Pretty much when you're going into a fast like that is eating a higher fat meal. Because when you're eating a higher fat meal, you are feeding your body what it needs. So when it doesn't get the food that it needs, it'll start breaking down the fat that, was stored. So eating a high fat meal, for me at this point, when I finish a 24-hour fast, it's not a big deal. Sometimes I'll go, 48 hours, and it's a little bit more. So I have to be careful how I ease back into it. But eating something bland, nothing that's really going to upset your stomach, like you probably wouldn't want to eat a steak, something like that. But eating like some fish, a piece of salmon, something along those lines that's a little bit lighter on your stomach that your body doesn't have to work to digest as much would probably be the best thing to do. And maybe a little bit of vegetables with it. But again, not a whole lot to break the fast. And, a lot of times when people come off a fast, especially one longer than they've ever done, they want to, just scarf down all kinds of food. But if you can kind of plan it to where you have, a piece of fish and maybe a small salad, and know in a couple hours you can eat something else if you're still hungry, then usually that will kind of ease your digestive system back into where it needs to go.
Yeah, it makes sense. So what was it like for you when you started doing fast? Like, did it amplify the good feelings you had?
Oh,
and then
yes.
I want to ask you about carnivore diet after that. But with fasting, what did it do for you?
Yeah, the fasting really, it's kind of like it just takes it up to another level. Again, it goes back to your hormones, the insulin. The thing that stimulates insulin mostly is carbs and protein. Well, obviously, we're not doing a lot of carbs on a ketogenic diet, but we're still having protein, and it stimulates your insulin some. And then when you go to a place where you're not eating anything, you're not stimulating insulin at all, then you get the long-term effects. There's something called autophagy. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of that before.
But eat.
It's
you consume your cells that should be.
Yeah, your cells are kind of cleaning out themselves. And when you go for an extended type fast, like 24 to 48 hours or plus, then you really kick into the autophagy, and you get the long-term effects of reducing chronic disease. That's what they're studying right now, and that's what evidence looks like. So when you're doing that fasting, a lot of times what people don't realize is they have surges of this hunger hormone called Ghrelin. And it's usually, it's cyclical, meaning that you usually eat at the same time every day. So when you eat at 12, we'll just say 12 and 6, your body's used to having that food there. And you may feel a little bit hungry if you go through that the first time. But what you will realize is if you don't eat and in 30 minutes, that hunger pain goes away because your hunger hormone decreases. Your hunger hormone doesn't increase until you feed it. It goes up and down just like any other hormone. So if you know that in the back of your head, like, hey, it's 12 o'clock, I feel a little hungry. Hey, if I can go to 12:30, I'm probably not going to be hungry. And then that usually can get through that. And then what I found personally is when I do an extended fast more than 24 hours, at that 24-hour mark, I may feel a little bit hungry, but I know if I don't eat in 30 to 45 minutes, I'm not going to be hungry anymore. And making it till the next day is so easy. It just kind of blows your mind until you've done it. But you do not want, I don't want anybody here that's never fasted before just to jump in and start doing that, because you kind of have to prepare your body for it by feeding it the right things.
Yeah, it makes sense. But again, what did you notice? You said it was the next level, but what does that mean?
More energy. I slept better. As far as like short-term things, I noticed more weight loss, especially not feeling as bloated. So when I'm putting on certain pants or, whatever it may be, I feel less bloated. My workouts, I work out every morning at like 6 a.m, and my workouts got better when I fast. So when I do a 24-hour fast, I work out in the middle of that, and my energy level is just where it was or even more than it was before. But it's one of those things when you're doing the fasting, I call it a therapeutic fast, because we're not just fasting just to fast. We're not fasting. We do it for spiritual reasons, me and my wife, because we pray about certain things. But also with fasting, we call it therapeutic because we know what's happening inside our body and the positive results that we're going to get, not now, but just long term for the chronic inflammation.
And then what about carnivore diet? What did you do there? How did you do it? And what did you feel from it?
A carnivore is fine. Somebody can do a carnivore diet, but they have to know what they're doing to get the carnivore diet. So many people want to do a carnivore diet and just eat like chicken breast and ribeye steak. And that's fine. You can eat those things. But if you're not eating what we call nose to tail, then you're going to miss out on some of the amino acids and certain fats that you need in your body to function. So when we say nose to tail, that means eating organ meat like liver. Liver is probably one of the best things you can eat. I don't like it personally. Therefore, I don't do the carnivore long term. I use it as a therapeutic sometimes to feel better and to get some of the long term effects from a carnivore. But if you're doing carnivore, if you eat the liver, you're getting the bones and you're boiling them and drinking the broth from it because you get a lot of certain amino acids with that. If you're doing those type of things, you can do a carnivore diet. Personally, it's a lifestyle. it's not a lifestyle that I want to live for the rest of my life. I can use it every now and then, and I do, but I like a salad. I like eating some greens sometimes. So for me personally, again, it goes back to your lifestyle. That's not something that I know that I want to do the rest of my life. If you come and ask me a couple of years from now, I may be doing carnivore. I don't know. But right now, I don't use that on a regular basis just because I like the other foods that I can eat on a ketogenic diet and get results as well.
Yeah. I mean, again, so you were on it. What did you feel? Was it, again, a step up for you, or was it just not really any different from what you were used to?
I felt probably less bloated because some of the vegetables that you can eat can kind of bloat you, like when you're eating salad and things like that. The feeling of the difference, there wasn't a whole lot as far as my energy level, as far as the sleeping, my workouts, those type of things. Probably the best thing is when you're doing a carnivore diet, and I use this a lot. We mentioned earlier on my females and perimenopause and postmenopausal. I use the carnivore diet a lot in the first couple of weeks because I really take their carbs down. And so I use it more in a therapeutic range or therapeutic targets rather than, just doing carnivore for the rest of my life. Because what I found is most people, don't want to do that the rest of their life. I felt just as well doing the keto, but I just miss doing the vegetables. So I felt about the same, but just my lifestyle, I just wanted to have those in my diet.
Okay. Well, very good. So what kind of programs do you offer? You mentioned like an academy, for listeners, where can they go, first of all, to find your podcast? And then what kind of programs do you have going?
Our podcast is called Our Ketogenic Life, and it's the same thing as our website and our Facebook. It's OUR Ketogenic Life, Our Ketogenic Life. And we have a program now, it's called a 10pounddown.com. It's a challenge that we have. And you can look on our website. It's www.ourketogeniclife.com. But we have a program called a 10 pound down. And what I do is take people through the first month of doing a ketogenic diet with, diet plans, meal plans, those type of things. And we get a Facebook page that people can ask questions. But the most important thing is they get videos from me explaining why we do what we do. Because a lot of times if people know what we're doing, then it's a lot easier for them to continue. The other thing that we can offer people is we do individualized coaching, and that's on our website as well under Work With Us. And it's really for those people who really want to go more in depth and more access to us to be able to get the results that they want. A lot of people can start off and do really well just by changing their diet. But sometimes after a while, people get a stall. They get they're not getting the results that they want to get. And you have to look at other things that may be affecting the weight issue with stress, like with cortisol, with sleep, and different types of exercises that you can do. So you just go to our website. You can look there. But we, on our podcast, we talk about a lot of things that we just do personally, and we explain a lot on our podcast, and they can go back and get a lot of information just from the podcast.
Very good. Any other advice or insights for people that want to do this type of thing?
Yeah, I would really encourage people. They may be wanting to have weight loss, but the ketogenic diet is something that can benefit them long term. And if any of your listeners really don't need to lose weight, and they're thinking they don't need this, look at the long-term chronic disease conditions that the ketogenic can help prevent. And the sooner that they start taking control of their health now, the better off they're going to be, 5, 20, 25 years from now.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Well, Kevin, thanks for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
No problem. I thank you for having me.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed.